Well, hi guys. Sinead here with Free Tours by Foot London. I'm being a bit quiet. I'm sitting on one of my favourite little benches in the most beautiful part of the entire of London. Join me for a memorable walk of Hampstead and Hampstead Heath. 4 miles from central London, and you could be in a little village somewhere. It's got that old school, more of a village feel to it. Now, over the centuries, Hampstead was always the safe haven for the rich to escape the smog and the pollution, and particularly in the turn of the Industrial Revolution, when masses of people flocked to London in search of work. Cholera, dysentery, scurvy, typhoid were commonplace diseases, and I speak quite a lot about this and the effect it had on London. So people tended to flock to the train stations and head up here, but originally it only had a population of about 200. But this spring well was found here, and like everything else, it became part of history, and that people believed that the waters from this spring well had healing properties, and it kind of catapulted into an area as a spa, if you like, for the rich and famous. And people flocked here to avail of the beautiful countryside and the heath, and nothing has changed today. Now look at these gorgeous little outdoor cafes to eat. Now I've been up here a good few days because I wanted to find some specific parts of this tour that I think will be of interest to you. Well, they're certainly of interest to me, and I want to kind of appeal to everybody. Look at this amazing second-hand designer store. I'm all over that later on, ladies and gents. Exclusive designer and second-hand store. This is called Flask Avenue, which is where people would come with their flasks, flask walk, to fill up on the healing, the waters, the spring water, which they believe would cure all ailments and illnesses. A bit like the healing properties of the waters of Bath that we spoke about in my Bath movie. But look at this. You have a little charming antiques market. Oh my God, I love these places because you never know what treasures you're actually going to find. So this is one of those designer charity stores, ladies and gents. Mary's Living and Giving Shop. And you might have noticed in my Wimbledon Village tour, that's exactly where I went as well. So she has a chain of stores. Look how quaint and pretty this little courtyard is here. You decide you want to get away from the hustle and bustle and the mania of the City of London. But look at these buildings. Now we're going to make our way to one of the finest examples of Georgian remaining streets in London. These stunning homes that I wanted to show you. We're going to turn right in a second, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what we're looking at real estate-wise here in Hampstead Heath. So look at this beautiful home here. Church Mount, 4 bedrooms, 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, 3 receptions, £4,895,000. A 2-bedroom apartment here is about £1,250,000. And we're up to the 3 millions, the 850,000, 1 million. Okay, let's see what 1 million would get us. Oh, 5 million. Hurst Avenue, guide price is 5 million for this property here, guys. 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms. Oh my God, look at that stunning property. 2,250,000. Okay, so I think that we're going to start a GoFundMe, especially for me, to buy that house. What do you reckon? Sorry, that was very cheeky. Right, we're going to head down Church Row here. Look at these homes, you guys. One of the finest examples of classic Georgian architecture. So again, built in the early 1700s in the Dutch style, which of course was made fashionable by William of Orange. This suburb is said to have more blue plaques than any other London suburb. Now, it's on this very street. We've had quite a few literary, artistic and intellectual figures have lived along here over the years. So the poet Lord Alfred Douglas actually lived down here at number 26. And this is number 26. He was known as Boise, and he lived here from 1913 to 1914. It was actually his rather tumultuous relationship with Oscar Wilde which led to him being convicted of gross indecency acts and sodomy. He went on to marry and have children himself, however, but he always resented his relationship with Oscar Wilde. And in fact, that kind of came out in him as a very cantankerous, angry personality. And years later, he was known for the several feuds he had with high-profile people, including one that had resulted in him being imprisoned in 1924 after being convicted of criminal libel against Winston Churchill. Now, another very famous resident on this street was right down here at number 17. Now, to be fair, he lived in quite a few addresses in London, but I feel like this was a lot of inspiration for his many, many books and his writing. And that is at number 17, was the former home of H.G. Wells. And he, of course, was the author of The Time Machine and The War of the Worlds. He used to host many dinner parties in there, and there's a great story of D.H. Lawrence complaining bitterly one night of being invited to dinner but being refused entry unless he was wearing a suit and tie and being properly dressed. But right down here, like every beautiful country village or stunning suburb, is this wonderful quaint church in the background. We'll just let this lady pass us here. And this is the beautiful church of St. John at Hampstead. Now, what I love about this is the graveyard, but you know me, I love a good graveyard. This church dates back to 1745, although there would have been several places of worship for the Saxons, or earlier churches would have been built on the site. And actually the word Hampstead comes from Saxon homestead. Homestead is, well, it's a Saxon word for a homestead. And originally all this land was owned by the monks of Westminster, but of course they were confiscated like everything else around London by Henry VIII during the dissolutions of the monastery. Now, I don't want to be too loud around here because I don't want to disturb people who have come to have a nice peaceful afternoon in the back of the graveyard, but the monks of Westminster themselves kind of all came up here trying to escape the Black Death. And the story goes about 26 of them arrived, but it was already too late for them because they arrived here fleeing the Black Death and they themselves had already contracted it. Now, in the graveyard here around the back, some notable figures who are buried here. Jane Austen's aunt is said to be buried around the back here. Look at this beautiful tomb. These tombs, now, it's kind of rough and ready, so you just have to have a little look around yourself. Hugh Gaskell, the famous Labour leader, is buried here. John Constable, the famous English painter, and his wife, I believe, and their children are also said to be buried here, but there is no actual marker of their tomb. But we'll just take you around. It's a rather small one, and I will be coming back, by the way, to the Magnificent Seven. I've yet to finish all the other graveyards, but keep an eye out for the Highgate one if graveyards are a thing. I've also done West Hampstead, Abney Park and Kensal Green. Oh no, West Bromwich, I believe. Brompton. West Brompton, Abney Park and Kensal Green are all done, and Highgate. So I have 3 more to do, folks. Look at this beautiful little quiet space. Now, what's also interesting around here, there's several members of the Du Maurier family are buried around here. And one of the grandchildren, actually, well, one of the Du Maurier family is Sylvia Llewellyn Davis. Sylvia Llewellyn Davis is part of the Du Maurier family, and we'll be speaking quite a bit about them today because they're very significant in this area. But she had several sons, but she's said to be buried here with 2 of her 5 sons, Michael and George. Now, you don't think you know who these are, but you do when I tell you the story. The 5 sons she had were playing one day in Kensington Gardens, and they happened to meet a chap called J.M. Barrie, which we all know, of course, was the author of Peter Pan. So her 5 children are said to be the inspiration for the book Peter Pan. And years later, when Sylvia herself died of cancer, J.W. Barrie actually became guardian to the 5 children. And it is Michael is the brother who is considered to have been the main inspiration for Peter Pan. They all had tragic ends to their life, which is also a very sad story, because Michael drowned in mysterious circumstances. He was only aged 21. His brother George died fighting in World War II. And his other brother, Peter, committed suicide at Sloane Square Tube Station in the 1960s. So, of all the tragic ending, but amazing to think they are immortalised in the incredible Peter Pan story. And a chance meeting with J.W. Barrie in Kensington Gardens. Now we're going to exit the church, and I want to take you also to the adjoining extension cemetery here on the right hand side. Now it's either one was also said to be, without a question of doubt, the inspiration for a very famous scene in Bram Stoker's Dracula. It is said there was a famous scene in it in the 2 books of the main characters, and we have Van Helsing, Dr. Van Helsing and Dr. Stewart. They eat a meal at Jack Straw's Castle, and we'll be seeing that later on. It's a famous former pub in the area, very famous for writers as well, used to have a tipple in there. But they leave that pub at the darkness at about 10 o'clock, and they head down here and they climb over a wall in the churchyard, and they're coming off to set off and then examine Lucy's tomb. So it's said to be either this graveyard they came to or the one directly behind me. Now, coming up here on the right was the first constable's watchtower. So I believe it's where the first police force for Hampstead was actually set up. But look how quiet it is here, folks. And we have the place all to ourselves. There you have the watch house. In the 1830s, the newly formed Hampstead police force set out on its patrol and nightly watch from this house. So the first Hampstead police force set up here. Now that's the top of Holly Walk. Let me take you up here. Let's bring us up here by Mount Vernon and Prospect Place. Look at that. Now it's around here at number 4, I believe, that Dame Judi Dench once lived. And that is Prospect Place. Oh yes, and here is the home of Robert Louis Stevenson, folks. Famous author. He lived here from 1850. Oh no, that's not the time he lived there. But this was his home as well. He was in good company if he was with Dame Judi Dench. So as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I love to think that Robert Louis Stevenson, we just passed the house where he wrote classics like Treasure Island and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But before we continue down to one of the most beautiful little pubs in London, I just want to show you this incredible building here. So this huge building behind the trees. Now, of course, it's a little difficult to see. The trees are covering most of it, but now it's expensive and luxury flats. But it was the former Mount Vernon Hospital in this area, and it dates back to 1896, and it was usually for the treatment of consumptive diseases. Now, consumption was something that we always read about in books like Pride and Prejudice and all the Georgian and Victorian novels. Robert Louis Stevenson actually died of consumption He died in Samoa. He was very young actually, he was only in the 40s. I like to think he was very close to the hospital he could be treated in, but now of course it's been transformed into luxury flats, and the rumour has it that a very famous Spice Girl has an apartment inside there. Which one I'm not so sure, but I suspect maybe Mel C. But let me take you down here, because this walk is a rather long one, but the nicest place to take a little break and possibly have a bite to eat or a refreshment, a little gin and tonic if you'd like, is right down here. And this is one of the most famous pubs in Hampstead. Always very busy, most notably on the weekends, but an incredibly historic place with the amount of famous writers that have drank down here. And this is how you get to it. This is Holly Mount. So you're on the corner of Hollybush and Holly Mount. Look, it tucked away here, down in this beautiful little corner, the Hollybush pub. Isn't that gorgeous? So it's one of those real traditional, old-fashioned public houses, ladies and gents. The perfect place to take a little break. It's been frequented by so many famous writers over the years, including Dr. Samuel Johnson, who was inspired, and most of his books were written up here, even though we all know he lived in Gough Square in the city of London. Dr. Johnson's museum is located there, where his cat haunches. You'll see more about that on my City of London walk. And James Boswell is known to have drank in here as well. But George Romney, famous painter, would have frequented here. But this pub dates back, you guys, to the 1640s. I mean, how immense. So we might have a charming little look inside. We'll see if they allow me to film anything in there. I mean, what a treat, you guys. Isn't it incredible? Jasmine's cottage. How lovely. And we're going to keep walking along here. And there's another beautiful home up here I want to show you down the end. It's said to be the home of a famous Hollywood director. And a lot of these places, when I research them, they're all very discreet as to who lives up here. And that's fine too, but it was the former home, coming up here on the right, of Gerald du Maurier. Now, Gerald du Maurier might not be very familiar to you, but we spoke earlier on about his granddaughter, Sylvia Llewellyn Davis, who had the 5 boys that were the inspiration for Peter Pan, Barry's Peter Pan. Her brother was a chap called Sir Gerald. He was actually the first actor to play the dual role of George Darling and Captain Hook in the original stage performance. So this is where George du Maurier lived, and it was his granddaughter, his daughter Sylvia Llewellyn Davis, his son Sir Gerald du Maurier, where the cigarette brand is named after as well, by the way. But his granddaughter was the very famous Daphne du Maurier. I always make the mistake of calling her Rebecca du Maurier because she wrote the famous book Rebecca. And she's also famous for The Birds and Jamaica Inn, all of which were actually made into movies and directed by Alfred Hitchcock. So this is called the Mount Square, and right down here is Admiral House. Now there's a not so discreet big sign down here saying Admiral House in Grove Lodge. This beautiful house was built by a rather eccentric Navy lieutenant in the 1700s. And apparently he used to fire cannons from here during the King's birthday. So he was kind of like his own King's Troop Royal Artillery. To celebrate the King's birthday, he'd fire cannons from here. But apparently the roof is said to be shaped like the deck of a ship. And there was also another famous author that lived up here, and his name was P.L. Travers, which you'll know as the author of Mary Poppins, which incidentally featured an eccentric admiral, Admiral Boone, who too lives in a house shaped like a ship, where he often fires a cannon as well. But over here is where John Galesworth also lived. And he was a novelist and playwright. He lived in the adjacent house you'll see here. He won the Nobel Peace Prize for Literature in 1932. But one of the chap that lived at Grove Lodge for a period of time, Sir George Gilbert Scott, who also lived in this house for a period of time, he's the architect of St. Pancras Station and, of course, the beautiful Albert Memorial in Hyde Park. He lived in Admiral's House between 1856 and 1864, and there you'll see Sir George Gilbert Scott. There's his plaque, you guys. So Constable has a lot of work as well. John Constable, who lived in Grove Lodge right next door. He has a painting of Admiral House in Tate Britain, I believe it is. He's quite a few paintings of this house actually on display in the V&A as well. I swear to God you get startled, folks, because any bit of noise around you, just that radio startled me there because it's so quiet and so peaceful. Let me just show you around here again. Look how fabulous. This actually apparently marks the highest point in London. Look, even the heron is chilled out up here. See him getting into the pond there, guys? How happy you are. So at 134 metres above sea level, it's named after an old mile maker actually, that can still be found in the bushes on the right hand side. Now we're not going to go in search of that, I'm afraid. But this prominent position actually made it a natural choice as a site for the Armada beacon, which marked today by this large flagpole. You see the flagpole here, folks? And the story goes behind these beacons that in 1588, when the Spanish Armada was first sighted off the Hampshire coast, a series of beacons were lit across the country to warn the Navy. But the signal took 2 days to make its way as far as Hampstead before it moved on. So they would light the beacon here as a warning to the Navy of the approach of the Spanish Armada. Right, let's go through the woods here together on our own, nobody else around. How amazing. Hampstead Heath, Hill Garden and Pergola. So the Pergola is one of the hidden delights of Hampstead Heath. It overlooks West Heath and was the dream of William H. Lever, late Lord Leverhulme, a wealthy idealist patron of the arts, architecture and landscape gardening, and Thomas Mawson, the celebrated landscape architect. In 1904, Lord Leverhulme purchased Inverforth House, which we'll be seeing in just a moment, then known as The Hill. A substantial house facing North End Way, he subsequently acquired adjoining land and had the opportunity to create the Pergola, a magnificent Edwardian extravagance which would be the setting for garden parties and summer evening strolls and be a striking addition to the garden and the hill. Wait until you see this. Okay, so this is going to speak for itself really. You don't need me destroying this fabulous experience. So here we go. Overgrown with vines and wonderful manicured lawns, we'll see in a moment. The wonderful contrast of the heath, the manicured lawns, but also the overgrown ivy on the walls. We're going to take a little walk up these steps. Flip-flops in hindsight weren't probably the best idea, but alas, it's warm. I mean, how exquisite. If this was your back garden. So we'll continue on here, and Lord Leverhulme actually made his money as a soap manufacturer, and he also purchased Hill House, which we'll see in a moment, but that was bought afterwards by Lord Inverforth, purchased the house of Leverhulme. But look at this, you guys. So this is one of the most Instagrammable spots, I guess. We're quite lucky today. I didn't see as many up here today as I did the last day, so probably the key to coming up here is probably on a weekday. This is the Pergola and Hill Garden. So how could you not? This is Hill House, by the way. It's also been, we'll get a better view of it in a minute, but it's also been, like everything else, developed into luxury flats and apartments up here as well. We'll walk along this way, and that'll take us out to the beautiful manicured gardens. I mean, this is just the dream. This is exactly where we want to be.
Everyone's walking.
I love listening into other people's conversations. I'm the worst. And it's not nosiness, it's just an interest in other people. Look at that, guys. I mean, it's no wonder so many brides come up here and Instagrammers come up here to get these incredible pictures. Continuing on, and it's just the lush green. It's just the perfect time to come on a beautiful summer's day. Let's get another view of the West Heath here. It's quite busy up here today, actually. Not so much a hidden gem anymore, but still not that too busy. Okay. The lush green, overgrown rambles, and it just adds to the stunning, quaint atmosphere of the area. I will be back with part 2 very, very soon, so stay tuned. Our next installment, Kenwood House to Keats House. But for right now, I'm going to head back out the Pergola, out this way, and up towards Jackstraw's Castle for part 2 of our tour. Thanks as ever for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Please comments. All your comments I read. I love to hear from you all. I want to hear what you think of this truly special place and hidden gem in London. Sinead signing out for part 1 of our Hampstead tour. Coming shortly, part 2. Thanks for watching. Sinead signing out here with Free Tours by FTBFLondon.